All right. And I want to get started. So I welcome you all to Hope Lives. This is a film screening of a documentary that was conducted in the state of Utah. We're going to watch the documentary together. If you've already watched the documentary, you're welcome to sign off and sign back on in about 50 minutes and then join us for the panel. That is totally up to you. If we have technical difficulties, I apologize in advance. And then the film takes about 55 minutes, and then we will be talking with some amazing panelists who are joining us. We have Flinn from the Idaho Crisis and Suicide Hotline. We have Dr. Gudmundsen from St. Luke's, and we have Dr. Hudnall from Hope Squad. And there were many experts in our area that I wanted to bring in to talk, but in the interest of time and attention span and urgency, these were the ones who were available and able to join us. I also want to talk about the heaviness of this topic and the tragedies that many of us have experienced. There are many of us who are here who have experienced grief and loss connected to recent suicides, or maybe it's stirring, emotions from connected loss. And I just want to acknowledge that and say that you are seen and you are heard, and that if at any point this is too heavy or too much, you don't have to stay. Remember that you would really benefit from talking to someone about it. And so I want you to know that 988 is the National Crisis and Suicide Lifeline number. If you have a 208 area code, it's going to route you to the Idaho call center. You can call, you can text, you can chat. You do not have to be suicidal to call. If you're struggling and you just want someone to talk to who is a non-judgmental listening ear, who can hear about frustrations or concerns, that is a great number to call. Or talking to someone that you trust, or reaching out to one of our organizations to provide you with guidance and a listening ear. So I want to send a great big thank you to Colby Twiss with Children's Home Society of Idaho. They have been an amazing partner for the Speedy Foundation. We have a long history with them. In fact, Speedy, who unfortunately passed away to suicide in 2011, he was a local Boise native, a three-time Olympian, and he was a young boy who went to the children's home for services. They do have incredible services, and we've been delighted to partner with them on many projects, including this one due to the urgency in our community. So I just put the link in our chat. They are a great resource. They have all kinds of services and programming that takes place. And so with that said, we've kind of covered the basics. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And this is the Warm Springs Counseling Center, the Children's Home Society of Idaho, an amazing organization. Hope Lives. So this is available to stream from PBS Utah. Again, it was created in 2016, so the statistics and the resources have changed. It talks about how there were 180 Hope Squads in Utah, and there are now, this program has really taken off. So Greg will be able to share a little bit more about the film. But we are going to be looking at some vignettes of real youth in Utah. We will be looking at one family who has lost their son to suicide, and then two other families where there was an attempt made, but they survived and then they thrived. The resources that are here, again, they date back to 2016. We know that the National Lifeline has been now updated to a 3-digit number, 988. You can learn more about the producer and the University of Utah. They've been an absolute delight. Whenever I'm doing work in Park City, I guess prior to COVID, I used to stop in at PBS and they had Hope Lives folders with DVDs and paper resources. So I just thank them for sharing this resource with us now and historically in the past. And so with no other ado, I want to go ahead and get started. So I bring you maybe a quick ad and then the documentary Hope Lives.
More information on exhibitions and events at suu.edu/SUMA.
Some people wonder why Utah has a high suicide rate. We're always in the top 5 or top 10.
I just wanted to not be because existence itself was so hard.
Simply thinking that the teenager or child in your house is well-adjusted and feeling fine doesn't mean that something bad might not happen.
Within minutes of waking up, I decided that I wanted to be alive.
I really wanted to be out of the woods. I wanted us out of the woods.
Hope Lives, Preventing Teen Suicide, a Utah Now production, is made possible by the members of KUED in partnership with the Clark L. Tanner Foundation, the Utah Medical Association Foundation, the Robert D. and Ariva L. Hewish Trust, and the Larry S. and Allison Smith Challenge Fund, encouraging individuals and businesses throughout Utah to support KUED community affairs programming.
Matt was the type of person that would have landed on his feet no matter what. He had that. He had that charisma, and he had that personality.
He was very well liked. I feel like I could brag about him.
Throughout his growing up, in sports, in class, with friends, they did look to him as a leader. Matt was a very good student, but the testing is what got him. Started getting connections in college as a sophomore, and then junior year, he was being approached quite a bit.
We knew that, going to college meant the world to him.
We had a pile of letters, some to schools back east, very nice schools, but with that comes a price, literally, and that was always something that he was mindful of, not wanting to add that financial stress on us. That Wednesday, got the letter, and they had said, no, not at this time. And I remember the look on his face.
It was like that moment, the Matthew that we loved, Matthew was gone. So over those next 4 days, those dudes were hell.
And he had a game the next night, Thursday.
It wasn't even watching Matt. It was just, he could barely play. I remember him being on the sideline, and he was so down.
After every game, Matt would wait for me and come find me to hug me. And I went down to the field, and I looked and I waited, and I'm looking for him and I can't see him. And that was the first time he'd never waited and hugged me. And we were all home Friday, home Saturday. He said he wasn't feeling well. I made him homemade chicken noodle soup is one of his favorites. And we just kind of hunkered down.
My parents had called him upstairs to come talk with them.
And I recall him just saying that he had lost his passion for lacrosse. And that stands out to me now. Because, again, that was such a joy for him. And he was just so focused on the disappointment that had come his way. His response to his dad, in a question, John said something to him, and Matt kind of questioned him and said, or what? What are you going to do? That just kind of caught us off guard.
was in this awful tone, like the deepest, darkest. It was not him. He was never one to say something or like talk back to my parents like that or anything.
Again, we told him we loved him, we supported him, we'd be there for him no matter what.
And I remember just thinking about it for a second. Like, what if he ends up trying to take his life because he's so sad? I told my dad that, and then my mom was like, we were just all kind of on the same page. But you think it, but then what do you do?
I just remember having that sense, that instinct at the time, you know, to huddle close. And I thought, okay, I want to just tell Matt to come upstairs and tell Callie, hey, let's watch a movie. Because it was not uncommon for us to do that. And at that time, Matt came up and he went in the kitchen and cleaned out the rest of the chicken noodle soup. I mean, he ate a huge bowl. The kid could eat. And I said, why don't you come up, you know, in a little while, and we'll just kind of chill out. And he went downstairs. And then an hour later, you know, Callie found him.
Attending the funeral of a student that has taken their life is one of the hardest things to do. Last year, we did have 2 suicides, and so it was something that was talking about. This year, we haven't had a suicide, but we're going to talk about it, and we're going to keep talking about it. We're going to do everything we can to prevent it. One of the things I love about our approach this year is that it's a community approach. We're part of what's called the Lone Peak Community for Hope. And this isn't a Lone Peak High School issue. This is our entire community, and we need to work together. Sometimes as the principal, you want to think, nope, I can deal with everything. I can do this. I can, you know, but you know, it's hard. I'll admit it. Teammates and friends of those athletes, come on down and help us celebrate. Thank you, Little Theater. We have 3 things that we're doing very proactively this year. One of them is the creation of our Hope Squad, so getting students involved, and the peer-to-peer contact. And the second thing, for the first time this year, Lone Peak High School has a full-time social worker. And that's made a huge difference, you know, having him here in the building, but also with the trainings and things that he can do with our faculty and with parents. And, you know, sometimes just knowing when do we need professional help.
Lone Peak is a delightful place to be. There's always something going on. There's always something for the students to be involved in. There were a couple of suicides last year, and they were pretty shocked that with as much positive going on here that would happen. I was told when I came here that the population is 96% LDS. And so I had anticipated kind of a certain behavior from the students. As I've met with them, a lot of the kids are struggling with, what are my beliefs? What do I want to do? You know, do I believe what mom and dad want me to believe, or am I going a different way? And that's very stressful for them. We have some gender identity issues. We have sexuality issues that we're dealing with. And so it's kind of a pretty normal school, despite the fact that there's such a strong LDS influence. There's a real pressure to perform well, to get that A, to get that scholarship, to get into that college. For me, I was happy to get a B, you know, in high school, but for these kids, an A minus can be the end of the world, you know? It's like, I can't possibly, what am I going to tell my parents? I got an A minus. A lot of them are very, very anxious or very, very depressed. And if they don't get some help, if they don't get some counseling, or in some cases medication, they will go down that path and choose suicide to get the pain to stop. We're still going to watch him because he only comes to school for 3 periods out of the 8. There are some pretty intense cases where I've been worried and have called the parents and been very blunt, used the word suicide, used the word kill himself, and said, we've got to get your son and daughter some help immediately. And the following institutions can handle the suicidal individual.
I think we can see through day-to-day interactions that teens can oftentimes be more enthusiastic or more energetic about particular things like social activities or other emotional occurrences in their life. In research, we can also see that teens can be more sensitive as well. I think we can see that in day-to-day life too. They're more apt to look at a short-term consequence or reward as being more meaningful than the long-term consequences. The reason that may be important with relation to suicidality is again, the short-term pros or cons of the situation may loom larger in the teenager's mind because of the way their brain is working during that period of development than they would for an adult.
You're separating from your family, but you don't have all that life experience to help you. So teenagers are more emotional, they're more impulsive, maybe do something on a whim without thinking it through, and they're more driven to please their peers, who may also be risk-taking.
The tendency, which many of us may remember from those times in our own lives, of thinking, well, this one thing is ruining my life. You'll hear a teenager say that about events a lot more often than you will people at other ages. I mean, I think we can agree across the board that teens tend to have reactions to life events that are different than they would be at another stage of life. And what we're beginning to understand is that that relates to concrete aspects of brain development, that the teen brain is simply different.
We all hope our teenagers can get through that era and mature and settle down with no harm done, but it is a time of car accidents, substance use, romances that fail, all types of stressors that put them at risk for feeling suicidal.
I started as a volunteer here in 2007, and now I'm the executive director. And I really like how I'm still working with the same community and the same stuff, but I'm just kind of using a different skill set. I am very lucky to be in a really good spot right now, and I pretty much have been for the last 12 years, probably. I'm 28 now. And I feel like my life has just been filled with kind of cool opportunity after cool opportunity to overcome the fact that for a while when I was a teenager, I didn't think my life was worth living. I always thought this stage of my life would be something worth dreading. The time when you have like the full-time job and responsibilities and the stress and pressures that come from like really committing to something. I thought that that was just like not for me, you know? But now that I'm here, I feel like I came to it naturally, and I feel really lucky to have had the challenges that I have and also to have survived them, because that just got me ready to take on quote unquote adult life. Going through high school, I was a kid in the, exceptional learning program and sort of had opportunities to take AP and IB classes, and I always did really well in them. I considered myself very smart. Around my junior year, I felt the pressures of being sort of effortlessly good at everything starting to fade away when the realities of kind of rigorous higher end school started to catch up with me. The kids who were doing their homework were starting to get ahead of me. I felt like I was living a bit of a lie, if that makes sense. Like, I'm supposed to be good at everything, and now I'm having to try hard, and it's no longer effortless, and I can no longer laugh off when things are difficult. And instead of growing up, I wanted to give up. I went into the attempt very impulsively. I remember sort of psyching myself up to do it based on this whole, you're gonna do this, you said you were gonna do this to yourself, don't back out, don't give up, you've gotta prove it to yourself that you're capable of this. I basically bullied myself into killing myself. That moment of jumping was just pure terror. Just, this is it, and there's no going back. And then when I woke up in the hospital 4 hours later, it was clear that I was going to live. I was just so grateful. Just kind of awestruck by how alive I was. My life has been good. I have had challenges since. I have felt really bad since. I think that I've gone through some bouts of what could be called minor depression since, but I've never wanted to kill myself again because it was such a relief to be alive after knowing that I very easily could have been dead. Nothing could go wrong in comparison to that. Everything is overcomable in comparison to that.
More recently, research that looks at the systems of the brain that underlie emotion, including feelings of being rewarded or reinforced by certain things, the limbic areas of the brain, has shown that teen years are pretty unique as far as the development of those systems. That's only part of the story, though.
The prefrontal cortex, which gives you, the judgment, control over things, is evolving, and so you may have these emotions come up, but not all the controls that you'd like to have. Most of the kids that die by suicide are struggling with socially, academically, and we always talk about that. That's the majority of it. There's a small group, maybe 15%, that are real high achievers. We think there's something about their psychology. They're perfectionists. They can't tolerate any failure. They don't have the capacity to have a plan B and a plan C. They may be really nice kids, but they're very hard on themselves. And they may be vulnerable to something that we would look at and say, well, you didn't get into that school, but you got in this other one, your life's going great. But for them, they beat themselves up.
I think that most people think that suicide attempts are preceded by like a lifetime of depression and anguish and sort of irreconcilable sorrow. That wasn't me. That's why this question of teenage impulsiveness, I think, is a really powerful one to me, because that's what you do when you're a teenager. You make bad decisions. Mine was just really bad. My attempt was sort of kicked off by a couple failures, little ones, but they were a big deal to me at the time. I had a girlfriend who I think broke up with me. We weren't necessarily that compatible, but I didn't like being broken up with, That made me feel like imperfect. And then I borrowed my mom's car, and I hate driving because I'm like the bike guy. And on the way back, I crashed the car on the freeway and totaled it. And I didn't like have a great idea of how car insurance worked, so I thought we'd just have to pay out of pocket the amount that the car was worth. And I was like, oh man, I just cost my parents all this money. I don't have that money. I feel like, you know, like a jerk and wasteful. I don't want to see my parents suffer. And literally the next day at 1 a.m, I made a plan to jump off a building. Looking back, I can't imagine why those factors were enough to make me do that, but they were at the time. It's incomprehensible to me. I've got enough distance from it now that I just say, really? That was enough? But you feel things when you're a teenager in ways that are indescribable and just so final. I think that it was rooted in something that was deeper and did take longer to manifest itself, which was an unwillingness to grow up, for lack of a better word. Unwillingness to face the kind of cause and effect challenges that life throws at you in the course of a normal life. If I had thought about it rationally, it would have been easy to say, yeah, it will hurt my parents more if I kill myself than if I crash their car and deal with the repercussions of that. I learned in retrospect that it was the worst thing I could have done to my family.
The person whom the world knew who would have died that day was not me. My family would have gone to a funeral using pronouns like he, using a name that my parents gave me that is, you know, not my name and doesn't fit at all. Some of my earliest memories are realizing that there was a difference between boys and girls and that I felt like I was the wrong one. I remember first thinking I want to be a girl in 3rd grade. Like I had a very profound moment of just really wishing that I would wake up the next morning as a girl. I was never willing to conform with what was supposed to be the standards for my gender of birth, you know, or the gender I was assigned at birth, which was male. So, you know, that was, I think 6th grade was the first time like someone called me a faggot. Like that my sort of femininity and my non-masculine way of dealing with sort of the society of 6th grade started to present something that is like, okay, that's not acceptable anymore to, you know, mostly boys around me. That's when some of the sort of bullying started, but it really, 7th grade and junior high was where it got bad. You know, I was also worried that I couldn't wear what I wanted to wear without being made fun of, you know, because I wore like slacks, turtlenecks, and loafers.
I remember even saying, do you want to, you know, buy different clothes? Like, do you want to kind of check out what people are wearing and wear the, you know, clothes that other people are wearing? Not because I wanted her to conform, I just was worried about how it would go. She didn't care about dressing like other kids or fitting in. She didn't like have the ambition to blend. I think because she had so much confidence, and that scared me, actually.
After I'd been in junior high only 3 months, and already a pattern had started where I could not go between one class to the next without hearing faggot. I heard faggot 9 times a day, every day, at least, at the bare minimum. And I hated going to school because of it.
There are daily occurrences in all school halls and everywhere that I know where bullying happens on a regular, constant basis.
The 3 B's.
What are the 3 B's? Okay. Somebody new. Maddie. Bully? If you think about your own life, if you've been lucky enough to not be a bully or be bullied, you've at least seen it happening. Okay? What forms of bullying is there that we know about? Look at all the hands. Unfortunately, we know all about this subject, don't we? And then we get them to narrow it down to one of those topics, right from the aspect of the bully, right from the aspect of the bullied, or from the aspect of the bystander. That's what we've done traditionally through all these years since 2006. Now we're focusing in on these ideas of empathy and coping. And what are you doing? Are you doing this on purpose? Are you trying to exclude other people? And this year we've gone through the English department. So every kid writes to 1 or 2 prompts. Then we take it from there, and the advanced theater students help me sort through, and we'll narrow it down. Then I'll work them into that script.
Then we started getting... At first, I didn't care what people thought of it, because sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But sticks and stones and broken bones hurt me more than the verbal knives sent my way. I got picked on because of a lot of things. The way I dressed, the music I listened to, the way I did my hair. I got called emo and goth a lot. And you know the emo stereotype that society thinks of? Depressed and angry with slit wrists or whatever. A lot of people ask if I was depressed and or cut myself.
As you were reading that, I really think that would be a really good thing to use as a monologue or something.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The only part is we'd have to cut out some of the things, like the slit wrists, because I think that'd be,
Yeah, it's like a really touchy subject. And self-harm, I guess.
We want to touch, not a lot on suicidal, but that was what it was about. A lot of it was talking about how she had to deal with that, being name-called and just all that stuff, but it's something that needs to be said and to be heard. So that's why I really liked it, and it was really stageable, so it was good.
A lot of people ask, are you depressed? Do you hurt yourself? They made me feel really bad about who I was. I didn't want to come off as some sad kid that's suicidal.
We are creating a whole culture in our learning community where the kids feel more free to talk about, hey, I've been bullied. My feelings have been hurt, and I'm going to talk to someone about it. And if an adult's not going to listen, then I'm going to talk to my friends until I feel better about it. And the friends share their own experiences with each other and build each other up.
My little sister, she's been getting bullied, and having this program and with me and all my friends who know how to deal with it, I feel safer about it and feel like I could help her more, because if I wasn't in this, I feel like I wouldn't be able to help her as much.
Coming here and watching and having these true stories, it really made me realize, and it made me look back and think, oh, was I doing that? Was I hurting somebody?
What have I done?
This is not adults talking down to kids saying, this is what you do when you're bullied. Because honestly, kids don't listen. They're afraid of retaliation. They're afraid that it's not going to work. For whatever fears they have, they don't trust an adult that says, look, I was bullied. I know what you're going through. This is what you need to do. So this is kid to kid. This is kid saying, this is my experience. This is what I've been through. And this is what you can do to get through it.
I want to be careful not to present myself as an innocent, perfect victim. Like, because I was victimized, I was really, could be quite awful and cruel to other people. I didn't think in the moment that what I was doing was bullying. I was just like, people are cruel to me all the time. Why do I owe people, like these people at this school, to be nice?
I think that she was, immediately bullied and identified as gay, called a fag and things like that. I think pushed around some. And I think that she didn't tell us much about that. And I think for what I knew, I also didn't know what to do. I talked to certain teachers and administrators, but there was just this feeling of like, I didn't feel any sense of hope for getting help within the school. And I think I didn't know how, well, I definitely didn't know the level of it until she attempted suicide the first time.
And then after that, I decided to homeschool. And that was good because it did alleviate the social pressures. But what it didn't do was, isolation really kicked in. And that's what drove me to some of my more serious suicide attempts. Like the 2011 was the year that I remember as me doing everything to try and kill myself.
I don't even know how to talk about it except for to say that that was a really harrowing reality. Like sometimes with all that was going on with her, understandable frustration and anger and her, dark depression and the danger of it, it felt like sometimes like being on a lifeboat with a wounded animal. Like it just felt lonely and really scary.
We know that bullying experiences can be something that can be a risk factor for suicide thoughts or suicide attempts. Perhaps more concerning is that cyberbullying has been shown to have an even stronger association with suicidality. When you're trying to figure out who you are and become an independent adult, you hang out with different crowds, you try out different activities, and I think generally that kind of changeability in teens is sometimes a protective factor against bullying. You start to get picked on in a particular sphere, well, you move to a different one. But if the bullying's taking place in a medium that transcends those spheres, then it's awfully hard to get away from. When somebody puts an insult or a threat up on Twitter or Facebook, it's there. When you're being picked on by somebody over social media, it's something that they can do morning, noon, and night. You can't avoid the lunchroom or go to school a different way or hang out with a different crowd and be completely free from it. Simply banning it is probably not an effective way to protect a teen. It's more apt to provoke a power struggle than to really be protective. On the other hand, being aware of the media that your teen is using, talking to them about the experiences they're having while they're on social media is important. Those are really crucial conversations to be having. What is it that you're hearing or seeing when you get on these media, and how do you feel about it?
Last year, especially with the first suicide, it was almost, not that we didn't want to address it, but you don't know how to. It's just such a sensitive subject, and I felt like you want to talk about it, but then you don't want to at the same time.
It used to be kind of a secret, like suicide, like a secret word, like you could never say it. And now it's just we want to get it out there and get people to know about it.
And you can be sensitive about it, but who really is going to be offended if you say, I'm just worried about you, like I keep thinking about you. I know, we've talked about this, nobody's going to be.
I don't need you to be a therapist, just listen to me.
That's it.
The goal is to educate every student in the school what to be aware of. What are the warning signs? What are the things to be aware of about depression, mental illness, mental health, etc.?
The main goal of Hope Squad is just suicide prevention and just looking for what to look for and the signs of suicide.
I love the proactive stance that Hope Squad has towards it, of just show the warning signs, where you can get help.
It's mainly a support group to get people educated about suicide prevention and signs of suicide.
We have a lot of meetings where we learn a lot about the steps and the signs of suicide, where we can become educated on it so we can help other people.
This was the first time our school has done this. You guys are doing such an amazing job. This is just an ongoing thing. There's never a time when, okay, we've reached our goal. We're learning a lot and things that work and things that don't work. And so I just appreciate you guys for coming to these meetings and for responding to Emily when she sends things out. And good things are happening. It's a great year, and we're 7 more weeks, right? We're ending strong. We're not done, right? 7 more weeks. So we're going to end strong this year. So give yourselves a hand. You're great.
When I first got the invitation to be on the Hope Squad, and after our first meeting, I just noticed that I was being more cautious of those around me, where before I think I was more focusing on myself and on my own situation and my own group of friends, but now I really make that effort to say hi to someone in the hallway or to smile and just really genuinely ask how someone's day is going.
There is a stereotype about Lone Peak, that, you know, that everyone here has money and that everyone's of the same religion and that everyone is Caucasian and speaks the same language. Because, you know, every one of these kids are different and they're amazing. And even though we might have a higher percentage of one certain religion here, you know, we're trying to celebrate the differences that we do have here.
Some things are awkward. You have a friend that's lost somebody, or that sometimes we just avoid it like that, like they just said. You just don't say anything and you just act like everything's normal, and you just, you know, that to just say something. Hey, I'm so sorry. Hey, I know you've been having a hard time, or I know, you know, but don't just avoid. It's like the elephant in the room. It's like you both know, but you don't know what to say, and so you choose not to say anything, but choose to say something. Just anything. Like there's nothing wrong ever with just saying, hey, I've been thinking about you.
With the Hope Squad, it's just, we're being straightforward and we're being direct, and we're talking about suicide openly, and we're getting it out of the closet, basically, and just saying that this is an issue and it's something that we need to address, and it's something that it's okay to talk about, and it's something that needs to be talked about. And so it's a very different approach than last year, where we're trying to make it a more comfortable situation, I guess, where you're not going to be looked down upon for speaking about it.
What the Hope Squad does is it starts changing that culture. We do a Hope Week, so 1 week during the school year, the Hope Squad students do activities during the day. We train them on the importance of not keeping a deadly secret, how to recognize those signs, and then when to go to the adult in the school. School can be tough. I mean, kids can be mean. And if you don't fit in, you're a little bit different, or you're not as popular, unfortunately, kids get bullied. They get made fun of. Then you add the other variables where sometimes I'm not feeling good about myself. I feel like I don't fit in. Sometimes we need to add that positive, and schools do everything they can. Schools do a great job, but I think it's the peer. Kids go to school 75% of the time to be with friends. I used to think as an educator it was because of me, you know, my classroom, my school. No, it was to be with those friends. And so if we can turn that climate into a positive, supportive role, I think all it can do is help.
Last spring, a student here committed suicide, and it was a student that no one thought would take his life. You know, straight A's, scholarship, the whole nine. And normally we'd been getting maybe 15 to 20 people out to these suicide lectures because of the denial and because of what was going on. Well, after this suicide, and we had this presentation here in Alpine, we had over 1,000 people come because suddenly they realized that, yeah, this is real, this could happen to anybody.
So in September of 2011, we took a trip up to Idaho to my grandmother's cabin.
Bea had her learner's permit. There's a bunch of dirt roads around there. And she seemed to be doing all right. And she asked if she could drive around the dirt roads. And I said yes. I was really thoughtful about what kind of dangerous objects were in the house. It had not occurred to me to think about a car in the way that ultimately I needed to think about it.
The first thought when the right wheel came off and I started to flip up like this was, I want to live. And I think this is probably true universally for suicides. The moment you no longer have any control, the moment it is no longer your decision, everything in your body will just scream out, don't let me die. I got this sudden rush of every possible reason I might want to keep living, everything that might keep me alive, and just suddenly realizing that I had made the biggest mistake ever. No matter how big of a burden I was to my parents, the burden of my loss would be that much greater. And I screamed. And I screamed in a way that I don't think I could scream again unless you pushed me off a cliff.
She wasn't gone very long before, quite honestly, I just had this I don't know, something really deep in my stomach. I knew something was really wrong. My impulse was to jump in the car and go find her, and then I realized she had the car and we're just at this, remote cabin at the end of the road.
I looked down at myself, moved around, nothing broken, no blood pouring from anywhere. I'm alive. Oh, thank God.
And then I got a phone call, and it was a man who had I think the first person who stopped at the site of her attempt, and he said, your kid is fine, but your car is totaled. And then he put Beatrice on, and she was kind of crying and saying, I'm sorry, but I got to hear her voice and know that she was okay. I said, can you bring her here? Because I had no idea from this phone call how the extent of the wreck, right? And something about, I don't know, even though she was on a backboard and then I rode in the ambulance and she was behind me with the IV, I knew that she was okay. And in an ironic way, I think I even thought this then, oh, she's safe now. Do you get it? She was finally safe, at least for a little while.
Somebody asked me recently, what's the first thing that you thought when your child told you this? And I said, I was afraid. I was so afraid. And then you read the statistics. And my child has been suicidal since the age of 8. We've been dealing with that since the age of 8. And when I read the statistics that transgender people, their suicide rate is at least 40%. And it's higher because there are some you don't even know they're transgender. Of course. And I just thought, that's it. There's no other option but to support my child and to give her whatever care she needs. There was no other option. And it was hard. It was hard changing the pronouns was one of the hardest things. And I kept going, really, are you sure? Are you sure?
More and more, that's what's happening for me, or it's the one-on-one visits.
I saw a lot of people, and still meet a lot of people, that have a deep, abiding love and faith in the tenets of the LDS faith. And they want to embrace that and maintain that. So this became then that group where there was comfort, there was support. One of the things that was big was just I want to love my child, I really, really do, but I don't get this. Being LDS myself, I understand the vernacular, I understand the idiosyncrasies.
So frustrating though, is I could maybe go to a neighboring ward and be fine, be accepted.
In terms of becoming an LGBT affirming therapist, it just seemed like there was a need.
Here I lost the leadership roulette. And so,
even when I hear people in my ward that might disagree and everything, when it comes right down to it, they are right there at your doorstep. That one-on-one, they embrace my son when they see him. They're really amazing in the actual interaction, whether the opinions are all over the place or not.
Unfortunately, recently, Mama Dragons are made aware of 2 or 3 suicides a week in the LDS LGBT community. When we get reports of another child who has taken their life, the question is why? What can we do? Why is this happening?
People don't know how to be a good parent to their LGBT kid. They don't know what to do. And sometimes they do horrible things because they don't know what to do. And if we can say, well, here's a better strategy, here's a safer strategy for your kid.
I think that's part of the so-called networking we're doing. It's not just for the kids. It's really, can we change the family dynamics?
I guess trying to keep our kids alive through education and advocacy and telling them that they're worthy, that they matter. You are perfect the way you are. God loves you. We don't want to change a thing about you. We love you.
At high altitude, not everybody, but a small number of people will get treatment-resistant depression. Whether you're in Wyoming or Colorado or Montana or Utah or Nevada, the rates are high. And they're substantially higher. For years we've been puzzled about that. If you take a map of the United States, an altitude map, and then you take a map of suicide rates, they look like the same map. You wouldn't know which one you were looking at.
If you look at U.S. counties, over 3,000 of them, and just look at the mean altitude of each county and plot that against suicide rates, you get an astonishingly strong relationship. But since my way of thinking was that depression was really a disorder of energy metabolism, it made sense to me to look at whether thin air had anything to do with this phenomenon that we've seen in the Intermountain West. And this is an effect that begins to appear at about 2,000 feet in altitude. And that's exactly the point at which your body begins to have trouble extracting enough oxygen to fuel all kinds of processes that are important. The neurotransmitter that most critically regulates depression and anxiety is called serotonin. And the brain's ability to make serotonin is strongly dependent on having enough oxygen. People are happy here, and if you talk to people who moved away from the Intermountain West, very often they'll say, you know, I had to come back because I missed the mountains. And it may be what they're missing is this sort of rush that we all get in terms of feeling better about things because dopamine goes up. There's some of us who are going to come to the mountains and experience depression or anxiety for the first time. On the other hand, the vast majority of people who live in the mountains will come back to the mountains, love living here, find things they really enjoy and are fascinated by. And so this is a bit of a Utah paradox, and it reflects the struggles our brains have in terms of keeping up with changes in our environment. And if you look at it more broadly, you know, all we're saying is that the air is thin in the Intermountain West. That's the only assumption we're making, and that's clearly true. And thinking about it in its most grandiose form, we think we can probably reduce suicide rates in the Intermountain West by 20% by 2020. So it's sort of alliterative, but I think there's some evidence that suggests that the effects can be that potent.
Way of interacting? Mainly it's your singing. For the past year, I've been living openly as who I am and had a chance to, been overwhelmed by how accepting my friends have been and really surprised at how accepting even my conservative family has been.
Mostly it's just a joyful unfolding of someone who is really herself. An unexpected pleasure is just like letting her borrow my jewelry and stuff like that. when she was expressed as a boy, she mostly wore turtlenecks and long pants, even in the summer. She took no pleasure in her appearance, like, and in fact, was hiding from it all the time. So to suddenly have this girl who would wear like a sundress and spin in front of a mirror and take selfies because her hair is cute, like that is so awesome and really, really fun. I don't know if she talked about the miracle of the clothes, but my mom brought some, our neighbor brought some, a couple of my friends who are tall gave her clothes. And so suddenly she went from having, two black turtlenecks to this closet full of like a pretty awesome wardrobe, really. It's emblematic of the blossoming of her, like the clothes aren't the most important thing, but it's, that's also happening in every sense. It's evidenced by her relationship with Cass and this being in love, I really admire the relationship. It's not like, oh, good, my kid has a girlfriend. It's more like, wow, how did the two of you, like, it's just miraculous, this love that they have. I think it's really like what a lot of people hope for their whole lives. They're experiencing young.
At the time, I was not thinking about them. I was thinking about me. I was being a selfish 16-year-old. And I am very lucky that I grew out of my suicide attempt, with a fully functioning body and mind. But I'm equally lucky that I came out of it with a good relationship with my mom, a good relationship with my stepdad, my dad, and my sister, and my friends. Because they had to forgive me for insulting everything they cared about. My parents loved me so much from the time I was born till the time I was 16. And I just said, hey, sorry, no, I'm gonna die now. And they did nothing to deserve that. Just raised me right, And so now that I've kind of overcome it and outgrown it and everything, I'm just like really grateful that they were able to forgive me so that I can have a good relationship with them and a full life. And if I hadn't survived, I don't know if my mom would have made it or been the same. And I don't know how she would have recovered, and she's amazing, so I can't fathom that. But the night of, I had a one-night perspective. I didn't have a lifetime perspective. I didn't have a 10-year perspective. And now that I have that, I'm just really grateful.
Suicide is just so prevalent in our world these days, and it needs to be talked about more. And I've always said, if I can just save one life and another family from having to go through what we went through.
Anyone who is in my situation, I just would say, try everything else. Let nature take care of the balance of life and death. You do your best to stay alive and have a good life.
Not that the weight was lifted off my shoulders, but I felt like I was sharing it. This is not a Lone Peak High School thing. This is a Lone Peak community. This includes all of us. There are plenty of people that can help, and I need the help, and I'm gonna utilize all of that help. It's gonna take all of us.
It's not just my child's life, it's this child's life, this child's life, this child's life. They're at stake every day. It's all at stake every day. So there's really not a more important thing to be doing than paying attention. This is not specific to being transgender or queer. This trouble is part of the landscape in a world that needs to grow its compassion. It's essential and it's sacred, and there's not a more important thing to do.
Hope Lives, Preventing Teen Suicide, a Utah Now production, is made possible by the members of KUED in partnership with the Clark L. Tanner Foundation, the Utah Medical Association Foundation, the Robert D. and Ariva L. Hewish Trust, and the Larry S. and Allison Smith Challenge Fund, encouraging individuals and businesses throughout Utah to support KUED Community Affairs programming.
Okay. Welcome back, folks. I've got my panelists who's starting to join us. Thank you for joining us to watch that film together, or having watched it previously on your own. I wanted to share just a little bit about myself. My background is in education and school administration. I taught in the West Ada School District. I substitute taught for the Boise District. I grew up in the Boise School District, but I taught for about 6 years out in West Ada. And my final year of teaching, I had an 8-year-old who told me her life, her parents' life would be better off when she was gone. And as an educator, I had no idea what to do with that information, but I knew that she wasn't talking about her parents having a blast when she got on the bus and they just stayed home and played video games. She was talking about ending her life, and I wasn't prepared for the conversation. I went back to all of my child abuse trainings, and there was nothing about when the child wants to hurt themselves. And so whenever I'm working with educators today, I ask them, what type of training they have. And very rarely do educators feel empowered to know what to do. It's typically just a basic module if their school districts require it. So I lean in as an educator to data-driven decision-making. And when things come up, I look to the research. So as I learned about the tragedies that have taken place in the Boise and beyond area, I pulled up Jonathan Singer's book, and looking at contagion and clusters, I looked to see that the suggested course of action is to develop a community response plan, to offer educational and psychological debriefings, to provide both individual and group counseling to affected peers, to screen for high-risk individuals, to report the suicide cluster responsibly in the media, and to promote long-term health recovery within the community to prevent further suicides. And so, knowing that these are the best practices and that having these conversations are difficult and that they're relatively new for the Boise community, I wanted to share this impactful film that I have had in my back pocket for a long time. And I want to acknowledge that the tragedies are not a Boise School District problem, and they're not a West Ada School District problem. They're a community problem. They're a Treasure Valley problem, and a community response is required. And so tonight, I just welcome our guests. I would love to have you each introduce yourself. I want to start out with Lee Flinn, the director of the Idaho Suicide and Crisis Hotline. Lee, would love to hear more from you and learn a little bit more about the history and the services of the hotline.
Sure. Yeah. Idaho Crisis and Suicide Hotline is in its 11th year. And one of the recent developments that I think people are very interested in is the transition to 988. In July of last year, Idaho Crisis and Suicide Hotline became the call center, the crisis call center in Idaho that actually takes the 988 calls. And so if anyone is tuning in and this is new information, one of the main things that I hope people understand tonight is that 988 is the universal mental health and suicide prevention number. And any person anywhere in the country can either call 988 or text 988 24/7 and get a hold of a trained crisis responder. So it's a really good resource for people that want to call for themselves or text on behalf of themselves, or if they're concerned about someone else.
Thank you, Lee. Joining us is also Dr. Gretchen Gudmundsen with St. Luke's Children's. And Gretchen, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background and the program that St. Luke's is able to provide for our community.
So, like Shannon, I was born and raised in Boise, Idaho, born at St. Luke's, educated in Boise schools, and so have a real history in Boise and in Idaho. I left for college and training, eventually becoming a child clinical psychologist with, I always focused on adolescent depression, adolescent suicidality, mood disorders, really with a focus of both understanding developmental psychopathology and then also treatment development. And then over time, prior to moving back to Boise 5 years ago, was really involved with different suicide intervention and prevention efforts at the University of Washington. And then when the opportunity to come back to Boise presented itself, I was really thrilled to come back with my kids and to have my family also grow up here. So I joined St. Luke's to help stand up what at the time was the first adolescent partial hospitalization program. We will refer to it as PHP, but it's a level of mental health care for adolescents. So for 12 to 17-year-olds for whom the once a week outpatient model is insufficient, it's not enough. So this does include kids who might struggle with suicidal thoughts, self-harm thoughts, but a broad range of mental health struggles. It can also support youth who might be stepping down from a high level of care, whether that's an acute inpatient hospitalization or possibly a longer term residential stay. But it is really, it's typically about a month long, and it provides individual, family, and group therapy, evidence-based treatment, as well as involvement with a child psychiatrist or educator. And then since we opened up, there have been several other programs within the Treasure Valley, but also in the state that have opened up as well. I also, just related to this film, I'm involved with our St. Luke's Suicide Prevention Collaborative, and also have been part of a team-based gender affirming care clinic.
Great, thank you, Gretchen. And Dr. Greg Hudnall is joining us from the Hope Squad program. Greg, would love to hear more about your background and the development of Hope Squad and kind of where it stands now, especially in relation to the state of Idaho.
Yeah, Shannon, thanks for the opportunity, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm a former high school principal, assistant superintendent in the Provo City School District. As a high school principal, I unfortunately lost some of my students to suicide and started researching and trying to do all that I could. And we started working with our community to train the parents and the adults. And unfortunately, Utah is at that top list that Dr. Perry Renshaw, who happens to be one of my mentors for many years now, talks about. We're just like Idaho, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, and we were averaging 1 to 2 suicides a year in my school district. The youngest was a 4th grader, unfortunately. And so we started training adults, but then we were still losing young people. And then we had a young man walk into Provo High School, take his watch off, give it to his best friend. Kind of heard about that in the show and said, I'm not going to need this anymore. Went on to tell 5 other friends he was going to take his life. And the next day he did. So we really felt we needed to start focusing on young people. So we partnered with Brigham Young University. When we implemented the program, Timpview High School, previous 3 years, Timpview had 4 suicides. And I'm proud to say that this is Timpview's 18th year without a suicide since we've started the program. We're now in about 1,700 schools around the world, and it's just been amazing to see these young people that are empowered to make a difference. So grateful to be here.
Awesome, Greg. Thank you so much. I wanted to say that several years ago, I was visiting some Hope Squad programs with Greg, and we had 2 folks from St. Luke's there touring. We went to Lone Peak, the high school where Matt attended, and we met with students in their Hope Squad program, and there was a senior who was a lacrosse player. He'd been a freshman when Matt died. And I asked him, if they had experienced any additional suicides in his time there. And he said, yeah, that they had. And I said, well, how does that, make you feel? And he said, I feel empowered because when one of your classmates, even if you don't know them, when they die by suicide and you don't have any tools, you feel helpless. And when you have the tools that the adults have provided you with, and it still happens, you know that you've done everything that you can do and that you're there to support your friends. And so I know that, student programming and training and education is not going to solve everything 100% of the time. But even when we do, as much as we can, and suicide still happens, it can be that protective factor, that postvention response. And so that is really why I wanted these folks to be here tonight to talk with us for the intervention piece of suicidality, the prevention piece, as well as the postvention following suicide loss. So I'm just going to open this up to the panel and ask, what can you tell us? What do you know about suicide contagion and cluster deaths? Is there anyone who wants to dive in?
I'll go a little bit with suicide clusters, contagions. I've moved into the postvention role now over the last couple of years, and I'm working with a school right now that's lost 7 kids since August. I get called in to work with communities. I get called in to work with schools after a copycat or a contagion. Usually it's 2 or 3 young people. Our biggest challenge is ultimately our goal is bringing the community together. So when I come in, I get invited. I ask to meet with the mayor, the city council, school district leaders, business leaders, chamber of commerce, and then the faith-based group. And then I go through and do a presentation. And one of the things I talk about, Shannon, is the concept that you mentioned earlier, that this is not a blame game. This is not the school issue. It's not, but all of us need to stand up together. And I talk about our mantra that while it takes an entire village to raise a child, we believe it takes an entire community to save one. And one of the things we talk about is educating the community. We want everyone to understand the warning signs, the risk factors, and feel comfortable talking about it. So that's step 1, the educational piece. Step 2 is knowing how to talk to someone who's struggling, because we're afraid to talk to them. We think if we ask them, it's going to give them the idea, when in reality, the research continues to show that talking about it can be one of the best things that we can do. And then the third piece, which is the most important, is where to go for help. You have 2 amazing people here that are the champions in your state that are there to help give questions, answers, responses, ideas, and suggestions. And most important, just listen. So we try to build these platforms to change the culture of the school, of the community as a whole. And it's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort, but, I'll use in my own state of Utah, we were called out to Harriman High School that had lost 6 kids in 1 year. And we met with the superintendent, met with the mayor, brought everybody together. And one of the things I asked the superintendent to do was to sponsor a luncheon and invite all the therapists and the local mental health entities. And she said, Greg, no one's going to show up. And I said, send out the invite. Over 70 people showed up. And as they were coming in, she leaned over and said, holy mackerel, you're not kidding. And so then as I was doing the presentation, I asked the groups, why are you here? And invariably the therapist said, these are our kids. This is our community. We don't want to lose any children. And so then it became that all hands on deck. And that's really the focus that we try to create, recognizing those who are most at risk, educating those parents on what resources are available, how to talk to your child, where to go and when to go for help, and then providing that ongoing support.
I think that was beautifully put. The only thing I would add in response to Shannon, your question about contagion and cluster effects with suicide, is that it's such a delicate balance, because I think, as Greg said, it is very important for everyone to feel as comfortable and clear as you can that asking directly about suicide is protective and important to feel comfortable doing. Another layer to all of this, particularly with relation to contagion and cluster, is that it's also important, as in response to loss, to suicide loss, that we are thoughtful and careful and responsible, also not to glorify it in any sort of way, which can be tricky to do, because of course there's going to be a wellspring of response in different ways. And so I think it's, and again, I think the antidote to that is to connect with the kids around you, find out what they're thinking and feeling, how they're doing, and honoring that, even if they didn't know someone who's recently died, or if they did, and validating that whatever response is okay and it's valid, and we want them to talk about it, and if not to you, to someone that they feel comfortable talking about. And again, I think, and this is probably true of media outlets, but also of potentially school leadership or other leaders, just to be, again, talk about it in a way that is clear and direct without glorifying it in any sort of way, which is usually an inadvertent thing that could happen. But I think that's just, to me, that's what I think about how to reduce contagion, since we know in any kind of, you think of concentric circles of being affected by loss, and it ripples out in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. I think the only thing I would add to that is, it matters greatly how the media reports. And I know Shannon's done a lot of work in that area. And, whether it's a reporter, or whether it's, kids at school or a memorial, in times like this, it's, everyone wants to honor and remember the person that was lost. And it's helpful to encourage people to focus on that person's life and what they did in their life and who they were, rather than focusing on their death or the details of their death.
Thank you, Lee. Yes, absolutely. In the chat, I'm just dropping a link to our Messaging Matters training. Lee joined the Speedy Foundation, as well as the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare's Suicide Prevention Program, NAMI, Utah. We put together a training for the media, and it was all based off of work that was put together down in the state of Utah. So if you are looking to know more about that, please look there. You can also look at the Mentally Covered website to download toolkits on safe messaging and best practices. I just wanted to go back to the movie. Matt's sister, Callie, in the movie said, you think it, but then what do you do? Mm-hmm. And I just want to kind of focus on that for a minute. What do parents have available to them? Where there are people that have shared in the Q&A, as well as in their registration, that Idaho lacks any type of residential treatment that is available outside of private pay, and that access to clinicians and wait lists are massive barriers. what do we have for folks where, you know, they might not even have the ability to have the conversation directly, let alone access to clinical treatment? What do you guys suggest we use to help navigate this difficult piece?
Well, I would say that, I mean, I think you've highlighted on some longer term critical resources that we need to build. And so honoring that, but in addition, sort of when I think about, you know, as a parent in this community and thinking about what to do, I think you want to think about how to forge connection, build on natural supports, as you put together a clinical treatment team. I typically, you know, in terms of finding, you know, it's very specific individually, but and I don't want to overburden schools who already do so much for our kids, but often teachers and school counselors, school social workers and psychologists have resources about possible therapy options. There are some schools that have therapists within the school. I think talking to your pediatrician, to your family medicine providers about ideas, those systems are being built. And in the absence of that, I think you really want to make sure that you are going back to the basics in terms of keeping your kids healthy, keeping them, you know, getting good sleep, getting outside. And it sounds probably oversimplified, but those are the building blocks to being able to regulate emotionally, being able to form healthy relationships. So I think you can miss some opportunities there. But of course, then if you are in a more urgent place where you don't have time and those kind of longer term strategies aren't going to work, I think at present you can access resources like 988. If you need to go to the emergency room, you can do that. I think you want to be just educating and getting ahead of things as much as possible. So I think just creating communication and openness as early on as you can. So even I think again, it's not entirely new that youth are affected by this, and the data at a national and state level, there's more of a problem earlier on. And so you want to have open communication about emotions, about learning how to manage things. You want to model that for your kids. And again, connect them to adults that they feel like they can talk to just about how they're doing, even if it takes a little bit of time to put together a professional therapy connection, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would add again, you know, the Idaho Suicide Crisis Hotline. You know, we are taking the 988 calls, and it's really, it takes a lot of courage to call. You know, one thing that I would say, so I don't forget, is, you know, a lot of times people think if our call volume is high, that's a horrible thing. And we actually see it the opposite way. You know, we are all, as people, we are all going to go through a tough time or tough times in our life, whether we're, you know, an adolescent or an adult. And the most important thing is to have supports and to reach out for help. So when our call volume or our, you know, text volume goes up, we see that as a good thing, that people are reaching out and asking for help. And, you know, we would also want people to know that we will, you know, we encourage everyone to call, again, whether for yourself or if you're concerned about someone else. And we will listen and we will support you in helping to make decisions for yourself. And, you know, when you call or when you text, at some point during that interaction, you know, the person who is responding to you, they will ask you some questions about how you're feeling. They will ask you if you're feeling suicidal, and that helps us know how to best support you. And a lot of people feel suicidal. So I think it's also important to talk about that and to make sure that anyone who might be listening and is struggling with feelings like that, you are not alone. It is a really common thing. It's a really common experience and feeling for people to have, of all ages. And we encourage people to reach out anytime. We do get a number of people calling, because they're concerned about someone else. And sometimes that's a parent. Sometimes it might be a minister, might be a teacher. And so it's, reach out anytime, even for people who are engaged in healthcare, and maybe they have a therapist, or maybe they are, seeing a family doctor. Those are all very important things. And, also want you to know that anybody can reach out via 988 anytime, so if it's 10:30 p.m. or if it's, 4 a.m., there's always someone to reach out to by calling or texting 988.
Great, thank you so much. So in many states have a suicide death review board or a youth death review board where they examine suicides very specifically. They will look at certain subgroups and determine, what can be learned in prevention efforts through like the psychological autopsy lens. I want to ask first, Gretchen and Lee, do you know if that is currently happening in Idaho or if there is discussion around that?
Base actually was today at an event, a zero suicide workshop, in which that came up. We have, and I'm going to get the name wrong, but we have a child and adolescent death review task force. To my knowledge, I don't know that they're doing psychological autopsies, so I don't think so, but I don't know if Lee has that information or not.
Yeah, I know that the Office of Performance Evaluations, OPE, is currently doing research or an analysis on the system in Idaho, and specifically around the information that coroners collect. And I don't think I have the full picture on that, but I know there's Shannon just dropped the link in the chat. But I know that that is something that is going on right now, and it's my understanding that the findings of that, the findings will be published in a report during the upcoming legislative session, which starts in January. So I think that will probably yield some helpful information about kind of what Idaho looks like.
Okay, thank you. We are going to be publishing an interview with Dr. Emily LaFrance with the Idaho Violent Death Reporting System. It was an interview that we did. It's a short clip. It's 5 minutes long, just to kind of go over what data is available and what Idaho makes publicly available in real time. But I also want to share just personally that it has been really frustrating in doing the prevention work with many of the coroners throughout the state. In 2017, we had a coroner come in from Southeast Idaho, and he gave testimony to the legislature that said, when he's responding to a death by suicide, if the family does not want that marked on the death certificate, that he is willing to do that, which is fraud. But there's a lot of cumbersome pieces in Idaho's coroner system, whereas states like Utah and Nevada have the medical examiner system. So I've been able to participate on the Nevada the Nevada Youth Review Task Force. But Greg, do you want to share a little bit about your experience? I'm also looking to see what are the learnings that this psychological autopsy work can yield.
Yeah, so the credit goes out to Dr. Doug Gray, who you saw in the video, child psychiatrist from the University of Utah, and one of our members who mentored us for 30 years in Utah. He did, with his study, he basically wanted to really find out what was the factor behind these young people taking their lives. And so he set up the psychological autopsy concept, where they met with the families, met with friends, met with schools, met with church leaders, did everything they could to better understand why this young person saw suicide as an option. And I think it was a 7 or 9 year study, and he looked at about 120 cases. He had a federal grant. It was a SAMHSA grant that he received. And so when he finished, I was there when he presented it to the legislature, and everybody got excited until they saw the cost. And so it was put off because I'll be honest with you, it's very expensive. We hire, when we testified to our legislature in Utah over a period of 2 or 3 years, and Representative Steve Elison out of Murray, I cannot say enough about you. You folks in Idaho, you need 1 or 2 supercharged legislators that will not back down. Representative Elison was a scoutmaster, and he had lost a 12-year-old to suicide, and that's how he got involved. And when he looked at Dr. Gray's study, he said, we have to do this. But it didn't happen overnight. It literally took him 3 or 4 years coming back and asking for the funds. But it pays for a full-time epidemiologist at the state to work in the state coroner's office, and then to have all the assistance that goes along with it. But for us, and in fact, they've come out with some of the results, and they're still coming out with some of the other. It's a continual process, right? But it's really helped us as a state because of that work. I believe that other legislators have jumped on board now. And I think over the past 7 or 8 years, we probably have had $30 to $40 million put into suicide prevention by these key legislators because a lot of the comprehensive work that's going on.
Awesome. Yes, Representative Eliason is an amazing person. We brought him and Dr. Hudnall up to Boise back in 2017. And I can share out Representative Eliason's slide deck of all the legislation that he's written. In 2018,
It's amazing.
It's really amazing. In 2018 in Idaho, we did use some of Steve's basic legislative work to pass one law. And there's some questions in here about, mandates, training mandates. Idaho does not have mandates for training. We do have some code that states that the State Department of Education needs to have a model policy, and that we should have a training menu of options. We got the model policy in place, but the training options became a politically charged piece within parties, and so it seems to have fallen off. Greg, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I would just say, everybody listening, push for it. Talk to your legislators, talk to superintendents, talk to anybody you can in the state of Utah. If you have to get licensed for anything, so nurses, doctors, for licensing, for certification, you have to have a 2-hour training in suicide prevention. I do a lot of that training for the state. But I tend to focus on educators and mental health folks. You do it every 3 years or every 5 years, depending on where you're at with your certification. And when I train about 80 in a group, and when the 80 first come in, all they do is gripe. But when it's finished to a T, 90% of them say, thank you. This was something I needed to renew and to remember, and it's going to help me in what I do.
I think related to this, there is the reality that whether it's investing in, training psychological autopsy certified providers, whether it's investing in more mental health resource, whether it's allowing coroners to do more than one evaluation a year. Like, there's a lot of financial barriers in terms of what our state is currently doing. And in the face of that, there are a lot of people trying to create, whether it's a CE opportunity or something else, but it's a reality that affects a lot of best practices that are, whether it's Utah or also Washington. We have people who have similar climates to us that are utilizing, again, what we know from the science, the evidence, can be effective, and yet it does take time and resource and money. So, Greg, your invitation or encouragement to find some leadership or to really advocate for that is really, I think, has been valuable for our neighboring states who've made a lot of progress in this area.
Yeah, and I echo that, and I think that's why I mentioned it took Steve 4 years to get, because we didn't have the funding. But I think what it did do, Gretchen, is it planted the seed. It planted the seed with enough voices out there saying we need to do more, and so that when we had a good year, at that time, Governor Herbert said, I think it's time to do something like this. So yeah, your point is well taken, because everything we're talking about, everyone takes money. And I think the other side of it, we have to be careful with our fellow educators, because all my family are are educators, and I listen to them, and it breaks my heart. And we continually dump everything on schools, and it's just become too much. And so we have to move forward. And I don't think we need to apologize, but I think we have to be careful and help own some of that, so that the poor schools are not doing everything for everybody.
Greg, I want to go back to the psychological autopsy piece. I believe it was you, and it might have been Representative Eliason, who had said anecdotally that they were identifying that some students had been restricted from technology or social media previous to death by suicide or suicide attempts. And that was one of the biggest questions that was in those participants' questions ahead of time. Tell us more about the social media, and I would love to tell us about your learnings there.
It was actually the CDC. So the health department invited the CDC to come in and look at our previous 5 years of study of suicides. And the caveat is that one of the state health department individuals who requested it was trying to get more funding from the state to do research on Hope Squads. It actually backfired, but that was the original intent, to get them in there to get more money. But what they found is that out of the, and I want to say 74, it doesn't come to the top of my head right now, but it's something 74 suicides. Some 18 or 20 of the young people had taken their lives after their phones had been taken away. And as we researched that, we did a follow-up and really dug deep to better understand what had happened. And what we found, because when the CDC report, the Deseret News published it, and so then I probably had 100 phone calls from parents and just frightened, of worrying. And because we train parents, take your child's phone, put it in a charger every night at 10 o'clock. Don't allow your child to have their phone up all night, because they're losing sleep. They're becoming the therapist, the adult, trying to save their friends' lives, etc. And the key was that as we investigated and drilled down on it, in many of those situations, the young person had pornography on their phone, and the parents took it away and really embarrassed and shamed the child. And it's something that I would shout out to you parents tonight, that you and I both know that at some point there's going to be some pornography on my phone and on your phone that we didn't want, nor did we ask for. And I train parents, I coach parents that when you give your child the phone the first time, to have that discussion with them. At some point, something's going to happen that's going to embarrass you. When that does, come and let me know, and you and I will just forget about it after you share it with me. And so in that situation, Shannon, it was probably handled in a very difficult situation. And we adults tend to do really well with shaming, especially when you add a spoonful of religion into it. And there's nothing worse for young people who are already mortified or embarrassed, and then you throw in the shaming and other things. And I caution parents taking away their child's phone for discipline, unless you've set it up and prearranged it, that these are the consequences or these are the things that go along with it. But I encourage parents to find other ways to discipline, less that connected tool that these young people live by. So it was the CDC report that pulled that up to the top.
Right. Thank you.
We hear that at the hotline too, sometimes from young people who have their phones taken away. And I thought that was interesting what you just said. I mean, I don't know that there's any single answer to that, but I can tell you that from what we hear, sometimes it may seem to cause the child to be in more of a crisis.
Yeah.
And it can be very serious.
I think too, that's I mean, part of why sometimes these types of conversations can be a little either confusing or not clear, is like you also, I think, have to really take your individual child or an individual situation real specifically, because I think sometimes that can be good advice, but it's certainly not blanket advice. You sort of have to know. And I think if you're still at a point where you're about to hand over the phone, or they're younger, or what have you, think about that. But I think being open to having a true dialogue about it, where you find some sort of middle path, or you figure it out, or you have some encouragement, whether it's like Greg was saying, the pornography, or you feel like your kid feels like, no, I am responsible for my friend's life, because they're not going to tell anyone, and they're talking to me about it, and figure out how to figure that out together. So I think social media, what was so challenging is most of us, that was not how we were raised. Things have changed dramatically, and they're constantly changing. So I don't think we can just pretend like it didn't happen or take it away. And I think you also have to figure out how to support limits with it, set up some guidelines in a way that makes sense for your kid. And also though, but just to have things be really agile and dynamic, and talk about it, because if you find you're getting into really big power struggles, or there's a big shutdown or shift, try to figure out why or what's going on, because maybe there is some really big thing you don't know about that would make maybe backing off for a night or tonight or for a certain amount of time. But
yeah, I think that key is the communication, isn't it, Gretchen? I mean, and I think it's interesting when you look at COVID. Suicides went down by 8% in girls and 4% in boys the first part of 2019. So if you look, I think it's either 8 months or 6 months, we actually saw a decline in suicides. I mean, those of us that work in the trenches all day long we were so excited about it. But then, of course, we saw the tables turn the next year. And what they found is that the number one reason suicides were declining, families were spending time together. Think about your own life during that time. You were watching movies, going for walks, having dinner together. We were reconnecting as a society more than we have in the last 50 years. The second thing is they found that because of that time together, parents started to realize which child was hurting the most, which child was suffering. And so that's why we saw that 1,000% increase in referrals for mental health services, because parents were noticing what was going on. When parents talk to me, I always remind them, go back to that time. And I know it was difficult for you as an adult. Think how difficult it was for your child, but try to find those good moments that came out of it, and try to reconnect, because communication is the only way we're going to get through this, is really having, like you mentioned, Gretchen, those dialogues where less judging and more listening. I've met with over 1,000 young people in my 30 years who have attempted suicide. And one of the things I always ask them as I'm leaving the emergency room or talking with them is, what could we have done differently? What could the school have done differently? What could the family have done differently? What could we have done differently as a community in general? And talking about the parents specifically, they said, I wish my parents would have, when they asked me what was wrong, I wish they would have shut up and listened and quit trying to fix it. And because what they did is, when I was so excited, because when my mom or dad started asking me, I thought, oh, now I can tell them. Now they're recognizing that I'm hurting. But the minute I told them and wanted to continue, they shut me off and wanted to fix it. And unfortunately, I think there's more times than not, we're really not listening to what our children are trying to say. And I think you parents know your kids better than anybody. And I think it's that, I call it the return to COVID, to step back and really build those relationships and monitor what's going on.
And I would say, as far as the listening, that is what we do at the hotline, and that is one of the benefits of calling or texting 988. So I would hope that individuals, parents, all of us share that number, because sometimes, and we hear this, we hear it from kids who call us, and we sometimes hear it from adults, that sometimes it may be easier to talk to someone they don't know. We have people tell us that, we have people that reach out that don't have a support system, and we have people that reach out of all ages that have support systems, but they rather talk to someone they don't know. And I forgot to say this earlier, so I want to make sure to mention that some of the resources that are available in Idaho, what's available now as far as crisis care and the crisis system, and when I say the crisis system, what I mean by that is when a person needs immediate help. It's great if someone is plugged in and they have a family doctor or they have a therapist, but if I need help, right now, maybe I can't wait till I have my therapist appointment or my doctor's appointment on Thursday. And so that's what the crisis system, that's what the hotline is, that's what 988 is. And some of the other things, and it does vary depending on what part of the state you are in Idaho. But, if we at the hotline, most of the time we're able to support the person and help them reduce their stress and de-escalate. Most of the time when a person is feeling suicidal and they reach out to us, we are able to work with them. We don't tell a person what to do. We support them in making decisions for themselves. Part of the work we do, may be working with that person to help them create a safety plan. In situations where the person needs a higher level of support than we are able to provide by phone or by text, then some other community resources may be available. The Department of Health and Welfare has mobile crisis teams, which are clinicians in every part of the state. That's, it's more robust in some areas, but in the coming years, the Department of Health and Welfare has a really big vision for how the crisis system is going to improve and grow in Idaho. So mobile crisis teams may be available in your area, and also crisis centers. Idaho right now has 5 adult crisis centers. A person has to be 18 or older. And a really new development just in the last couple months or so are youth crisis centers. Idaho now has 3. There's one in Boise, Pathways, there's one in Idaho Falls, and there's one in Twin Falls. And these are crisis centers for adolescents aged 12 to 17. So whether it's an adult crisis center or a youth crisis center, let's just focus on the youth crisis center for now. An adult, a parent, you can take, if your child is in crisis and it's at night, it's at a time where you can't get them to maybe their doctor or their therapist, you can take your child to a youth crisis center and they can get immediate help. There's no cost. It's a no hold. You can go there with your child and stay for a while, and you don't have to have an appointment. It's walk-in. So those are some resources that I wanted to make sure and mention. Health and Welfare's mobile crisis teams, and also Idaho's crisis centers.
Thank you, Lee. I just put the link to those crisis centers. I've reached out to see if the state has pamphlets or any type of documentation on it. I've seen the news reports that these youth crisis centers are out, and it has not been updated.
Okay.
I do know that there are
Yep.
some really incredible. Gretchen, do you have an updated link?
I have a pamphlet, and I could drop in some information about the new Boise Pathways Youth Crisis Center.
Awesome. I wasn't
And
able
there's
to find
also
anything on their
PayPal
website.
is another resource in the Boise area for youth needing extra support.
Okay, awesome. If you want to keep dropping those in, and to the panelists, you're welcome to go through the questions and answer any questions that you'd like to. I've been answering some. There's a couple folks who are raising their hand, and in our format tonight, we're not going to be able to take any live questions. So if you have questions or if you have comments, please put that in the Q&A. In the Zoom platform, you should see a button for Q&A, and you can put that in there. I have an intern who is modifying. Nevada has an awesome little parent's guide to crisis, how to navigate crisis throughout the state. And she's a Boise State student who grew up in Elko. And so she is modifying that with Idaho resources. So we will get that out to St. Luke's and to the hotline and other partners to verify it. But that would be one piece to share with families trying to navigate crisis. Greg, tell me more about parent resources.
Yeah, so well, let me just first, one of the questions was, where do teachers and others go for help? So I put up Sprock. Sprock has a really good library. Sprock is the nonprofit to SAMHSA, and it stands for Suicide Prevention Resource Center. When I was working on my doctorate, they were so helpful. They just open up their library. But there's a really good, it's tips for teachers, and it's guidelines for mental health and questions that come up in the class and how to handle specific situations. And then parentguidance.org is a great website. We were very blessed. One of the founders of doTERRA, Greg Cook, approached us many years ago and said, hey, I want to get involved and help. My daughter was on the Hope Squad. How can I help? And we just said, you know what, we need help for parents. So they have this amazing website. It's a 4-tier. First 2 tiers are free. You can get online and ask any therapist a question for free, and you can see the thousands of questions that have been asked. And then the second tier is you can take a class for free. I have a class on there, Suicide 101. And they're usually a 50-minute class, but they're very, very helpful, and they're taught by some of the amazing leaders across the country. And then the third one is there's a monthly fee. You can join a support group. So if you're struggling, my child has come out, or I have a suicidal, or my child with depression, whatever it is, anxiety, you can join this other parents from across the country and pay a nominal monthly fee. And then the last one is you can sign up for therapy. So it's a really good program. We use it with our parents in Utah.
Thank you, Greg. I wanted to put a quick link to Impactful. There's been a lot of questions about what are the contributing risk factors, or what are some of the experiences that our youth are struggling with. And the ones that people have already identified are anxiety, bullying, struggling with gender identity or sexuality, social media, access to communication, virtual communication 24/7. And so we've got 3 films. The impactful films are Like, which is about social media and technology, The Upstanders about bullying, and then Angst about anxiety. And so I wanted to share that as a resource. And Gretchen, you listed the Trevor Project. I would love if you could speak a little bit to that. We had that great story from Beatrice being so vulnerable and sharing that, through the Hope Lives documentary. And I know that that is a contributing factor to some of our young people in Idaho. And I also know that there's legislative pieces that are in play. And I'm wondering if you could clarify what does the legislative action that is coming down really mean to Idaho's youth and families?
Yeah, I might take those backwards. So the House Bill 71, which passed last spring and goes into effect on January 1st, essentially criminalizes medical intervention for the purposes of gender dysphoria. So those are things like puberty blockers, cross hormone therapy, any sort of surgery, which is not happening in Idaho under the age of 18. So it really is more those prescriptions. So those, because we've had there's been some confusion about what is happening in that type of space in Idaho versus other states. So one thing to know is that there is no prohibition with social transition, dressing how you want to dress, using a name or pronouns that align with your gender identity. There will not, there are certain states that there might be a child protective report if you're known to help a kid get gender affirming care. That's not what this law is about. It is it's directed towards medical providers who administer or prescribe those particular interventions for that particular diagnosis. But because there's a lot of questions and confusion, some people feel like they haven't even been able to do what we've been talking about today, whether it's about gender or whether it's about someone's mood, talking, connecting, exploring, creating space. So that's going to reduce suicide risk for all kids, including LGBTQIA kids who, again, wherever they are, in terms of their process of trying to navigate that, creating space without judgment, without shame is really important. The Trevor Project is an excellent resource that is specific for kids, LGBTQIA kids and families. As you can imagine, and this is a place that someone who might get steered if they did call 988 in the same way that a veteran might get steered to a certain specialized person to talk to through the helpline. So again, the idea is to reduce barriers because a lot of LGBTQIA kids haven't always felt safe to talk about what they're thinking or feeling, and they don't necessarily want to teach a lesson to this well-meaning person who might not know much about being transgender or being gay or whatever it is that a certain kid is wanting to talk about. Because we were talking about different risk factors and we highlighted a few, but as I think as well, or was highlighted in the film, it's not the state of being LGBTQIA that causes a suicidality per se, but the discrimination, fear of judgment, that kind of atmosphere or bullying that Beatrice in particular experienced. Whatever the derivation of that is, that's what causes risk. So things that cause shame or humiliation are really other risk factors that we weren't just highlighting that are important to know about. I think that's part of what's so tricky about social media is you can't turn that off. It's not too late to call the family phone. There's that access, including access to bullying. Of course, there's access to support online too, but that's part of what I think has contributed to some of the demographic changes in rates in the last several years.
And Lee, one of the new features for the crisis line is that connection to the LGBTQ support for youth. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Yeah. It's important to know when a person calls 988, and again, from anywhere, call 988, there's a greeting and then there's a phone tree option. So a person can press 1 to connect with the Veterans Crisis Line, press 2 for the Spanish language line, and press 3 for specialized support for LGBTQ, technically youth, but that connects to the Trevor Project. So, or a person can stay on the line and then they'll be connected to the closest crisis call center. So in Idaho, that would be us. So there are options. And again, the important thing is for a person to reach out. And, when you do reach out to 988, you can say as much about yourself or as little. It really is, up to you what you want to talk about.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I know we're a little bit over time. I wanted to touch on just a couple other things. In the chat, I'm putting links to the Spark study and the Spring study that are concluding and just beginning. It's a partnership between the Hotline and St. Luke's. I was able to sit down with Dr. Anna Radin with St. Luke's. She's worked very closely with Lee Flinn on studies. And so I will share after this webinar wraps, I will send out a link that you can watch that 30-minute interview just about what these studies are, about carrying contacts, what that looks like. But I did want to highlight that in that interview, we talk a little bit about the Idaho Youth Risk Behavior Study. And I just put a link in the chat to those results. That is kind of where nationally we gather our information. This is what youth report every other year on what's going on at various grade levels. So it will be Idaho's last year participating, and Idaho's withdrawing. And from everything that I've read and everyone I've talked to, there's nothing that will be replacing it. Colorado is stepping away from it, but they're replacing it with a much more cumbersome survey. Florida has also pulled away. And from everything that I understand, it's because of the pronouns and asking questions about gender identity. And so it's going to be a big detriment to Idaho. I know that we get a lot of our federal funding for grants by using data that comes through the Youth Risk Behavior Study. And so if you're looking to advocate or just to understand something more, please talk to your representatives to find out why Idaho's doing that, and if we have plans to put something else in place or to help them understand the necessity of this data. Gretchen.
The only thing I'd add, first off, here, that's if we can't measure it, it's really hard to know if what we're doing is helping. Megan Smith, Dr. Megan Smith at Boise State is doing what she can to fill that gap, in addition to doing a lot of work with upstream prevention for communities of youth. And so she, I think, some of her work is towing that line of maybe making it a more Idaho specific type survey. So I would encourage people to engage in that research and to advocate that you do the youth risk behavior survey again, because I think it's critical to understand how we're doing, in addition to having access to funding and resources to put into action these programs that we know are effective.
Okay. All right. I know that we're a little over time, and I just want to come back to my amazing panelists who are here with us. I would just ask in conclusion, for the folks who are here, a lot of them are educators, they're parents, they're working in the healthcare system. What do you recommend a community like Boise do in response? Because we're really in the thick of it right now. What are your takeaways or your calls to action?
I know we've touched on this, but I think it's important to emphasize again that, we've talked about risk factors, and it's also important to remember protective factors. I know Dr. Gudmundsen mentioned some earlier when she was saying, make sure you're getting healthcare, make sure you're sleeping, make sure you're eating. Connections, and then Shannon and Dr. Hudnall mentioned this, connections to friends and family and the community. There's not just one thing, but that is an important thing. And it could be connections, within the family to friends. It could be connections at church or a synagogue. So I would just encourage people, we haven't said and discussed everything tonight, but look online at some credible resources. Learn the warning signs, understand the risk factors, and also pay attention to the protective factors.
Thank you, Lee.
I guess I would add to that in terms of a call to action. First off, you're here tonight, so that is a huge first step. I think you want to, if you find yourself feeling any sort of shame or taboo, I would encourage you to push through that. And whether that's talking to teachers, talking to your kids, friends, moms, figure out how to grow that village. I think, Greg highlighted some really things, kind of surprise silver linings that came out of COVID in terms of that spending time together, that kind of reorienting as a family. And I think the flip side of that too is that we've kind of sometimes, for some families, have become more isolated, or our kids missed a lot of socialization, and depending on their age, they're a little bit behind. And so I think giving each other grace, assuming positive intent, but again, leaning in, connecting, forging those connections with people that you know well, and that maybe, whether it's your neighbors, just try to engage with one another, because really it in addition to these bigger system level things, we need to really start close to home and wrap around and really flesh out the kind of social connectivity in your kids' lives and in your own lives. So also model this, like self-care, and that sometimes you get sad and you go through emotions. So both kind of tend to your kids, but also tend to yourselves, both for your own well-being and to model how to be a healthy human being that can weather through hard times.
Thank you.
You know, for me, I would say it would be a challenge for all of us to be more kind, less judgmental, and to be that safe person, whether it's a family member, a colleague, a friend comes to you in distress, to be that kind listening ear. We need more love in our society, and peace, and all of the other things that go in hand. So I think Idaho is on a great projection. You're doing great things. Some of our best Hope Squads in the country are in Idaho. And so we're seeing great things come out of it. So thank you for everything you do. And Shannon, thank you for you and your organization putting this together. And Gretchen and Lee, an honor to be with you. I have grandkids I'm going to run, so bless you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Greg. I just want to close up by saying there are some amazing questions here. So I will take some time after we wrap up and pull together answers. There's a lot of people that wanted resources redirected. I'll also follow up in an email with the resources that ended up in the chat. There were a lot of questions about Hope Squad. Is it in Boise? How does it compare to another program called Sources of Strength? There were questions about QPR and Assist. So I can definitely pull together the resources that are in our community or that are in certain communities. I am delighted to have learned that the McCall-Donley area has adopted Hope Squad. The Speedy Foundation has been using some of our funding to help support that. They're also getting them started in Cambridge, Council, Midvale, some places that have experienced tragedies in recent years as well. They're rural communities. They're incredible, and access to healthcare is a distance. It's a long ways to get to Ontario or Boise, and so I'm just delighted that is a community, a region of our state that is taking that on. Hope Squad is not for every school, it's not for every group, but it does have the peer-to-peer piece. It's the one that I've found to be the most powerful. But really, it's finding something that works for your school, for your community, and then implementing it with fidelity, really listening to youth and training ourselves up until we're not uncomfortable with this topic. I really liked in the film where the young man said, I'm looking back with, a lifetime perspective now. In that moment, I was looking, at that moment in time, but now I'm looking back with a lifetime. And I'm guessing most people on this call, we have a lifetime of experience, and our young people have brief moments. We know that their frontal lobes are still in development, and their ability to, think in abstract ways is still in development. And so Just knowing that, and knowing that they're begging for education and understanding and programming. They want to feel empowered, and a lot of them are frustrated that it's not happening. We have a fraternity at Boise State who's adopted the Speedy Foundation, and I'll go into chapter meetings and give trainings or just presentations, but I'll always say, you know, raise your hand if you ever had a training like the one I just gave you, just a gatekeeper training. And probably, you know, 25 people's hands go up out of, you know, a group of 70 kids, young people. And then I'll say, okay, keep your hands up. Now stand up if you went to school in California or Washington. And it's those same 25 men who stand up. And so we have to do better with just the basics, and we can all do it. So there'll be a lot of follow-up. My call to action to you is a lot of things. Like, this was one community conversation. Where do we go from here? You know, what do you have the capacity to do? Who can you talk to? This can't be a one and done type of thing. We've experienced this type of grief and loss before in Boise, and it's possible we'll experience it again, but there's a lot that we can do. It's going to take more than just one person's voice or one person's ideas. So thank you, Gretchen and Lee. It was so great to chat with you tonight. Thank you for being here. You guys can go ahead and sign off. I'm just going to leave it open for one more minute if anybody wants to add any additional questions that we can follow up with. I also want to just thank Colby with the Children's Home. There was a question about youth groups. Children's Home has youth groups. There's other places that have youth groups locally, and we can pull those together as a resource. But Children's Home is going to be putting together an evidence-based support group for youth who are grieving suicide loss. So that is definitely a need that we've identified in the community, and they are working to fill that. Okay, great questions. We'll follow up online. Look forward for an email. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Take care.